In the grand theater of world literature, few adventures shine as brilliantly as those we bring to life. Here on Echoes of Stories. Tonight, the darkness parts to reveal a legend. The Count of Monte Cristo by the master storyteller Alexandre Dumas. First unveiled in serial form in 1844. This immortal tale has enthralled generations, a saga of betrayal, vengeance, and the quest for redemption. The version you are about to hear is drawn from the public domain archives of Project Gutenberg, preserved in its purest form for all who seek its power. And now, the next chapter awaits. This is The Count of Monte Cristo, Episode 7. At last, fate seemed to grant Edmond Dantès the chance he had long desired. By an unexpected twist of fortune, he could now set foot on the island of Monte Cristo without drawing the slightest suspicion. Only one more night stood between him and his goal. Yet that night was restless, his mind burning with anticipation. Images both wondrous and troubling swept through him. Whenever his eyes closed, he saw Cardinal Spada's letter blazing upon a wall in fiery letters. If sleep briefly claimed him, dreams carried him into shimmering caverns, their floors paved with emeralds, walls set with rubies, and roofs glittering with diamond-like stalactites. Pearls dripped slowly from unseen springs, falling like precious rain into his hands. Overcome with awe, he filled his pockets with these treasures, only to emerge into daylight and find them turned into worthless pebbles. Seeking to return, he found the grotto had retreated into a twisting labyrinth before vanishing altogether. No effort of memory could recall the magical word that might open it again. The treasure had slipped away, returning to the hidden guardians from whom he had almost stolen it. When day broke, his mind remained as restless as during the night. Yet reason began to shape his thoughts into a clear plan. By evening, preparations for departure masked his inner agitation. Over time, Edmond had gained such respect among the crew that his voice carried the weight of command. His instructions were always clear, his judgment precise, and his orders willingly obeyed. Even the old patron had grown to recognize Edmond's natural authority, seeing in him the man who might one day take his place. At 7 o'clock, all was ready. 10 minutes later, the ship passed the lighthouse as its beacon flared to life. The sea lay calm under a fresh southeast breeze, while above them God's own lights, countless stars, began to shine. Edmond sent the crew to rest, keeping the helm for himself. This was a common habit, for having known long years of isolation, he often craved the stillness of solitude again. And what solitude could rival that of a lone vessel gliding through the night, surrounded only by the vast silence of the sea and the infinite sky? In those hours, his solitude was filled with thought, the darkness alive with visions, the quiet stirred by expectation. By morning, every sail was drawing full in the wind, carrying them swiftly toward Monte Cristo. The island grew on the horizon as Edmond, leaving the helm to the master, tried to rest in his hammock, but sleep never came. 2 hours later, he was back on deck as they neared the island of Elba, passing Mauritiana and the low green outline of La Pianosa. The jagged peak of Monte Cristo, glowing red under the fierce sun, rose sharply against the deep blue sky. Edmond adjusted their course, leaving La Pianosa to starboard to save time. By late afternoon, the island stood clearly before them, every detail sharpened by the golden light of sunset. He studied the rocky slopes, shifting in color from soft pink to deep blue, and from time to time his face betrayed the battle of hope and fear within him. The intensity of his emotions was such that even the most desperate gambler, staking everything on a single throw, could not have felt more fiercely the weight of what was at stake. Night fell, and at 10 o'clock La Jeune Amélie dropped anchor, first to arrive at the meeting point. Even with his usual self-control, Edmond could not suppress his urgency. He was the first to leap ashore, and though he resisted the impulse, his heart longed to press his lips to the earth like a man returning to his homeland. Darkness lay over the island until, at 11, the moon rose above the horizon, silvering every ripple of the sea and bathing the rugged slopes in a soft, pale glow. To the crew, this place was a familiar haunt, often used in their ventures. For Edmond, it was different. He had sailed past the island before, but never set foot upon it. When he asked Jacopo where they would sleep, the answer was simply aboard the vessel. At his mention of the island's caves, Jacopo seemed unaware of any such grottos. A cold sweat touched Edmond's brow. Yet he reasoned that perhaps the openings had been sealed long ago, either by accident or by design for greater secrecy. That night, no search could be made, for business called. A signal from the sea, answered in kind by La Jeune Amélie, heralded the arrival of another vessel. White and silent as a phantom, it anchored close by, and the work of unloading began. All the while, Edmond guarded his thoughts, hiding the restless anticipation that might betray his purpose. His somber expression, marked by years of hardship, kept suspicion away. The next morning, armed with a fowling piece, powder, and shot, Edmond announced his intention to hunt the wild goats that leapt across the island's rocky heights. To the others, this was nothing more than a taste for sport or solitude, though Jacopo insisted on accompanying him. They had not gone far before Edmond brought down a young goat. Handing it to Jacopo, he asked him to return to the crew and prepare the meal, signaling when it was ready. Left alone, Edmond climbed high above the shore, pausing to look down at his companions. Far below, Jacopo had rejoined them, and they were busy cooking the game, adding to their modest feast. Edmond's gaze softened with a faint, knowing smile as he reflected on the fleeting fortunes of such men who risked their lives for 50 piastres, only to spend their gains in brief extravagance. Hope lifted him above such concerns, though he knew disappointment might one day drag him back to that same measure of happiness. He clung to the certainty that Abbé Faria had not been wrong, and that the treasure was real. His hunger now was no longer for liberty alone. It was for wealth, an urge not born from greed, but perhaps from the boundless desire that Providence had planted in every human heart. Following a narrow cleft between two walls of rock, along a dry watercourse where no human footsteps seemed ever to have passed, Edmond drew nearer to the place where he believed the grottos must once have been. Step by step, he examined every detail of the shore. His eyes caught faint markings on certain rocks, lines that seemed too deliberate to be natural. Time had left them largely untouched, though in places they were hidden under flowering myrtle or draped in pale moss. Patiently, Edmond pushed branches aside and brushed away the growth, uncovering the guiding signs. His heart quickened. Perhaps these marks were the very ones left by Cardinal Spada himself, a map for his heir in case of disaster. The solitude of the spot seemed perfect for concealing a treasure. Yet the question remained, had the island guarded its secret through the years, or had other eyes already followed these silent clues to the heart of its mystery? From his hidden vantage, Edmond realized that the guiding marks stopped abruptly about 60 paces from the harbor, ending not at a grotto, but at a massive, rounded rock set firmly in place. He wondered if he had only traced the start of the path rather than its conclusion, and so turned back to search anew. Meanwhile, his companions had prepared the meal: fresh water from a spring, fruit, bread, and the roasted kid. Just as they were lifting the meat from the spit, they saw Edmond leaping with the sure-footedness of a mountain goat from rock to rock. A single gunshot rang out, the agreed signal for his return. Changing direction, he began to descend swiftly toward them, but in mid-course his foot slipped. They saw him lurch at the edge of a cliff and vanish from sight. Alarmed, the crew rushed to him, Jacopo arriving first. Edmond lay face down, bleeding and dazed, having tumbled 12 or 15 feet. Rum was poured between his lips, reviving him, but he complained of a heavy head, searing pain in his loins, and an injury to his knee. Attempts to move him brought such agony that he refused to be carried. Though unable to eat, Edmond urged the others to take their meal without him. They did not need much persuasion. Hunger and the rich smell of roasted meat quickly claimed them. An hour later, they returned to find Edmond had managed only to drag himself a short distance to rest against a mossy rock. His pain had grown worse. The old patron, needing to sail by morning to deliver cargo at the frontier between Piedmont and France, urged Edmond to try standing, but repeated efforts left him pale and gasping. The commander suspected broken ribs and proposed carrying him aboard, but Edmond refused, declaring he would rather remain than endure the torment of movement. Moved by loyalty, the patron announced they would delay departure until evening, a decision that surprised the sailors, for such a concession had never been seen from him. Yet Edmond, unwilling to be the cause of breaking strict routine, insisted they depart. He asked only for biscuit, a firearm with powder and shot for hunting or defense, and a pickaxe to build shelter if needed. The patron feared he might starve, but Edmond preferred the risk to the agony of being moved. Calculations were made. The vessel, rocking gently in the harbor with her sails half set, could leave at once. The captain wrestled with the choice. They could not leave him, yet they could not remain. Edmond pressed them to go, suggesting that if they met a fishing boat within a few days, they could send it for him, paying well for his passage back to Leghorn. If not, they could return after their venture. Jacopo then stepped forward with an offer to stay behind and care for Edmond, even at the cost of his share in the voyage's profit. The gesture was met with gratitude, but Edmond would not accept it. A few days of rest, he believed, would be enough, and he held hope of finding among the island's rocks certain herbs well known for healing bruises. A faint, knowing smile crossed Edmond's lips as he clasped Jacopo's hand in gratitude. Yet nothing could alter his resolve to remain, and to remain alone. The smugglers left behind the supplies he had requested and prepared to depart, often glancing back toward the shore. Each time, they signaled a warm farewell, and Edmond answered with a simple lift of his hand, as if his injuries allowed no other movement. When their sails finally dipped beyond the horizon, he reflected with quiet irony on how loyalty and friendship sometimes shone brightest among men whose trade lay outside the law. With deliberate care, he climbed to the crest of a rock that commanded a wide view of the sea. From there, he watched the tartan complete her final tasks, weigh anchor, and glide away, poised and balanced like a waterfowl taking flight. An hour passed before the vessel vanished completely from sight. Once certain he was alone, Edmond rose with sudden vigor, moving with the sure-footed lightness of a wild kid leaping among myrtle and stone. Gun in one hand, pickaxe in the other, he made his way quickly toward the great boulder where the trail of carved marks had ended. His mind turned to the story once told by the Abbé Faria, the tale of the Arabian fisherman and the hidden treasure, and he pressed forward with a silent thrill, as though preparing to speak the ancient command that would open the way. By midday, the sun blazed high overhead, its heat radiating against the rocks until they seemed almost alive with it. From every patch of brush, the steady, monotonous chirping of grasshoppers filled the air. The leaves of myrtle and olive trees shivered softly in the warm wind, and bright green lizards darted away at Edmond's every step, their scales flashing like tiny emeralds in the light. In the distance, wild goats bounded nimbly from crag to crag. The island, though alive with creatures, still left Edmond with the sense of being utterly alone. Alone, yet guided, as he felt, by the unseen hand of Providence. And yet, an unshakable unease stirred within him. The strange, almost primal wariness that even in the most deserted places makes a man feel watched. The sensation grew so strong that, just as he was about to begin work, he stopped. Laying down his pickaxe, he took up his gun and climbed to the very summit of the highest rock. From there, the world unfolded in every direction. Corsica lay close enough for him to distinguish the outlines of houses. Sardinia rested in the distance. Elba shimmered under the weight of its own storied past. Far off, an almost invisible line traced the coast of Genoa and the bustling port of Leghorn. But Edmond's eyes were fixed elsewhere, on the two vessels that had departed that morning. The brigantine was vanishing into the narrow blue cut of the Bonifacio Strait. The tartan, sailing the opposite way, was just about to curve around the coast of Corsica. The sight reassured him. They were gone. Lowering his gaze, Edmond realized he stood at the island's highest point, a lone figure upon a vast pedestal of granite, ringed on all sides by the endless blue of the sea. Waves broke far below, curling into white foam at the island's base. Cautiously, he began his descent, careful not to let his earlier feigned accident become real. Following the carved trail he had studied before, Edmond made his way to a narrow inlet, a place hidden away like the secret bathing pool of some forgotten nymph. Wide at its mouth and deep in its center, it could easily shelter a small lugger, keeping it completely concealed from prying eyes. His mind turned to the clues Abbé Faria had once laid out so patiently, the reasoning that had led them through a labyrinth of possibilities. Perhaps, Edmond thought, Cardinal Spada had once steered his little vessel into this secluded cove, hidden it here, and then followed the marked path to bury his treasure. That thought had drawn Edmond back to the great circular rock. Yet something did not fit. The boulder was massive, far too heavy to have been lifted without a crowd of strong men. Then the solution struck him like lightning. It had not been lifted at all, but lowered. He sprang forward to inspect the base. It was exactly as he suspected. A sloping channel had been cut, and the boulder had been slid down into place, where it now rested. A large stone had been wedged beneath it, and smaller pebbles packed tightly around to disguise the gap. Over time, earth had settled in. Weeds and grass had sprouted. Moss clung thickly to the stones, and myrtle roots had woven themselves deep, making the old rock appear as if it had been there forever. Dantès worked carefully, moving the earth until he uncovered what seemed to be a hidden mechanism. With steady determination, he struck the time-hardened wall with his pickaxe. After 10 minutes of effort, the barrier gave way, revealing an opening just large enough for an arm. Searching for leverage, he cut down the strongest olive tree he could find, removed its branches, and slid the trunk into the gap. But the rock before him was immense, far too heavy for any man to shift, even one as strong as a legend. He realized the wedge itself must be destroyed. His eyes fell upon the powder horn left by Jacopo, and a faint smile crossed his face. This dangerous tool could serve his purpose. With the precision of a seasoned pioneer, he dug a narrow space between the upper rock and its support, filled it with powder, and fashioned a fuse from his handkerchief soaked in saltpeter. He lit it and stepped back. The explosion thundered through the air. The force lifted the upper rock from its base, shattering the lower stone. A rush of startled insects poured from the opening he had made earlier, and a massive snake, coiling like a dark spirit guarding the treasure, slithered away into the shadows. The now unstable rock leaned toward the sea. Moving with care, Dantès circled it, chose the most vulnerable point, and placed his lever deep into a crevice. Straining with every muscle, he pushed until the rock, weakened by the blast, began to sway. Again and again he pressed forward, resembling one of the titans of old, until the mass broke free, rolled down the slope, and disappeared into the ocean below. In its place lay a circular space, revealing an iron ring embedded in a square stone. A wave of triumph and disbelief surged through him, yet the effort had drained his body. His knees shook, his heart raced, and his vision blurred, forcing him to stop. The weakness passed quickly. Gripping his lever once more, he hooked into the ring and pulled with all his strength. The stone gave way, exposing steps that led down into darkness. Any other man might have rushed forward in joy, but Dantès paused. A pale unease crossed his face as he considered the possibility of deception, that the treasure might never have existed, or that it had been taken long before by the cunning hands of Caesar Borgia. His mind pictured that ruthless adventurer descending these very steps, torch in one hand and sword in the other, while loyal guards kept watch above. Now, with no expectation of riches and only curiosity to drive him, Dantès stood at the edge of the shadowy passage, still and thoughtful, before taking the next step into the unknown. Dantès considered the possible fate of any guards who might have once known the secret of this place. He imagined they had likely shared the same grim destiny as those who buried kings, never to leave their charge. Yet he reasoned that if Caesar Borgia had ever come here, the treasure would have been found long ago, for such a man valued time too much to waste it replacing the heavy stone. Deciding at last, he descended with a faint smile, murmuring the word that holds the last fragment of human hope, perhaps. Instead of the oppressive darkness and foul air he expected, a dim bluish light filtered through cracks in the rock, bringing with it the scent of the outside air. The granite walls glistened as though dusted with diamonds, making him wonder if these glittering surfaces had inspired the abbé's dream of treasure. Yet the cardinals had spoken of farthest corner in a second chamber, and Dantès had only found the first. Searching with practiced care, he tapped at the walls until one section gave off a hollow sound. The stucco broke away under his strikes, revealing a large white stone fitted to seal an opening. A strange weakness overtook him as the certainty of Faria's truth grew stronger. Resting briefly, he stepped outside to make sure the island was deserted, then returned, feeling renewed strength. The stones came free one by one, until the opening was wide enough for him to enter. The second grotto was lower and darker, with stagnant, heavy air. He let the torchlight chase away the gloom before exploring further. In a deep corner, the ground drew his attention. A few blows of his pickaxe struck something hard, iron. His pulse quickened. Working carefully, he confirmed the shape beneath the soil was a wooden chest bound with iron. A passing shadow at the cave's entrance made him rush upward, only to find a wild goat nearby. Fearing to make noise, he instead cut a resinous branch, lit it from the smuggler's old fire, and returned to his work. By torchlight, he cleared the earth until the chest lay fully revealed. An oaken coffer bound with steel, bearing on its silver plate the crest of the Spada family. A sword on an oval shield, crowned by a cardinal's hat. Dantès recognized it instantly from Faria's many drawings. There could be no doubt now. No one would conceal such a chest if it were empty. Removing the last barriers, he saw the heavy lock, 2 stout padlocks, and carved handles. The weight was too great to lift, so he attacked the fastenings instead. The sharp point of his pickaxe bit into the space between lid and frame. With a final surge of strength, the locks gave way, the hinges broke, and the ancient chest stood open before him. Edmond was suddenly overwhelmed by dizziness. He carefully cocked his gun and set it beside him. Then, closing his eyes like a child trying to imagine more stars in a shining night than the sky actually holds, he reopened them and stood frozen in awe. Inside the chest, 3 compartments awaited. The first was ablaze with piles of gold coins. The second held bars of rough gold, plain and without shine except for their value. The third overflowed with diamonds, pearls, and rubies, which clattered softly against one another like hail striking glass. After feeling and examining these treasures, Edmond burst through the caverns in wild excitement. He leapt onto a rock overlooking the sea. Alone on the island, surrounded by unimaginable wealth, he wondered if he was dreaming or awake. Was this vision real or a fleeting illusion? His joy was so intense that he briefly rested his head in his hands to keep from losing control. Then, in fits of ecstatic frenzy, he ran among the rocks, startling goats and sea birds with his cries and movements. He finally returned, still in disbelief, to the cavern and its hidden fortune. Falling to his knees, Edmond clasped his hands tightly and uttered a prayer only God could understand. As calm returned, he began to count the treasure. 1,000 gold ingots weighing 2 to 3 pounds each, 25,000 crowns bearing the likeness of Alexander VI and his predecessors, and countless pearls, diamonds, and precious gems, some set by master jewelers and worth far beyond their raw value. As light faded, Dantès, wary of being caught in the cavern, took up his gun and left. His supper was simple, a piece of biscuit and a little rum. He rested for a few hours near the cave's mouth. It was a night filled with both joy and fear, emotions he had faced before in his extraordinary life. Daylight arrived again, the very day Edmond Dantès had waited for with eager, restless eyes. At first light, he resumed his search. He climbed the rocky height he had scaled the night before and scanned every inch of the landscape. But the wild, barren scene looked just the same in a morning sun as it had in the fading glow of dusk. Returning to the grotto, he lifted the stone, filled his pockets with gems, and carefully reassembled the box as securely as possible. Then, sprinkling fresh sand over the spot where the box had been hidden, he gently tamped down the earth to leave a perfectly even surface. Leaving the grotto, he replaced the stone, piled broken rocks and rough granite fragments on top, filled gaps with earth, and planted quick-growing wild plants like myrtle and flowering thorn. He watered them and meticulously erased every trace of his passage, restoring the entrance to look as wild and untrodden as when he had first found it. Having finished, he anxiously awaited his companion's return. But waiting on Monte Cristo, guarding a treasure beyond imagining, did not satisfy the hunger in his heart. He longed to return to human society, to claim the rank, power, and influence that only wealth, this greatest of all human forces, could bring. On the sixth day, the smugglers arrived. From afar, Edmond recognized the rigging and handling of La Jeune Amélie. Dragging himself forward with an air of weakness, he met them at the landing place, masking his improved condition with the claim that he still suffered greatly from his recent accident. When he asked how their trip had gone, they told him that although their cargo had landed safely, a guard ship had just left the port of Toulon and was racing after them. They had to make all speed to escape, lamenting Dantès' absence, since his superior sailing skill would have been invaluable. The pursuing ship nearly caught them, but nightfall allowed them to double the Cape of Corsica and lose their pursuer. Still, the trip was successful enough to satisfy everyone, and the crew, especially Jacopo, expressed regret that Dantès had missed out on their profits of 50 piastres each. Edmond remained perfectly composed, hiding any hint of a smile at the thought of what he'd gained while isolated on the island. Since La Jeune Amélie had come just to fetch him, he embarked that same evening with the captain bound for Leghorn. At Leghorn, Edmond visited a Jewish dealer in precious stones and sold 4 of his smallest diamonds for 5,000 francs each. He half feared that such wealth in a poor sailor's hands might raise suspicion, but the clever buyer asked no questions, happy with his profitable purchase. The next day, Edmond presented Jacopo with a brand new vessel and gifted him 100 piastres to outfit it with crew and supplies, instructing him to sail immediately to Marseilles to seek out an old man named Louis Dantès in the Allies de Mailhan and a young woman named Mercedes from the Catalan village. Jacopo could hardly believe the generous gift, which Edmond explained as money inherited from an uncle, a story made plausible by Edmond's refined education. Jacopo never doubted its truth. With his contract on La Jeune Amélie ended, Edmond bade farewell to the captain, who tried to persuade him to stay. But once Edmond explained the legacy story, the captain gave up. The following morning, Jacopo sailed for Marseilles, with orders to join Edmond again on Monte Cristo. After seeing Jacopo safely out of the harbor, Edmond made his final farewells aboard La Jeune Amélie, distributing such a generous gratuity that the crew wished him well and promised to follow his fortunes closely. To the captain, he pledged to write once his plans were settled. Then Edmond set off for Genoa. Upon arrival, he found a small yacht being tested in the bay, built by order of an Englishman who prized Genoese craftsmanship in fast Mediterranean vessels. The agreed price was 40,000 francs. Struck by the yacht's beauty and performance, Edmond offered the owner 60,000 francs for immediate possession. The owner accepted, as the intended buyer was away traveling in Switzerland for weeks, and the builder expected to start another yacht soon. The sale was quickly arranged. Edmond and the owner met with a Jew, who paid the builder 60,000 francs in bright gold coins. The builder offered to provide a crew, but Edmond politely declined, saying he preferred to sail alone and enjoyed managing his yacht himself. The only favor Edmond requested was a secret cabin closet with 3 hidden compartments near his bed, accessible only to him. The builder cheerfully agreed to the task, promising completion the next day, using dimensions and plans Edmond provided. 2 hours later, Edmond Dantès sailed out of the port of Genoa, watched by an immense crowd drawn by curiosity to see the wealthy Spanish nobleman who preferred to manage his own yacht. Their initial wonder soon turned to admiration as they witnessed the flawless skill with which Dantès handled the helm. The boat seemed almost alive, responding to the slightest touch with remarkable intelligence. After a short trial, Dantès acknowledged that the Genoese had truly earned their renowned reputation in shipbuilding. The spectators followed the little vessel with their eyes until it disappeared from sight, then began to speculate about its destination. Some insisted it was heading for Corsica, others guessed the island of Elba. Bets were placed that the yacht was bound for Spain, while others confidently claimed it was sailing for Africa. But no one suspected Monte Cristo. Yet Monte Cristo was precisely where Dantès directed his course. He arrived there near the end of the second day. The yacht proved herself a top-class sailor, covering the distance from Genoa in 35 hours. Having carefully observed the shoreline, Dantès chose not to land at the usual spot, instead anchoring in a small, secluded creek. The island was completely deserted, showing no sign of visitors since his last departure. His treasure lay exactly where he had left it. Early the next morning, he began transferring his riches, and by nightfall, all his vast wealth was securely stowed in the secret compartments. A week passed. Dantès spent it skillfully maneuvering his yacht around the island, studying her like a master horseman would a prized steed destined for important service. By the end of the week, he knew the yacht's strengths and weaknesses well. The strengths he planned to enhance, the weaknesses to fix. On the 8th day, he spotted a small vessel under full sail approaching Monte Cristo. As it neared, he recognized it as the boat he had gifted Jacopo. He immediately signaled, and the signal was returned. 2 hours later, the newcomer dropped anchor beside the yacht. A sorrowful answer awaited Edmond's eager questions about the news Jacopo had gathered. Old Dantès was dead, and Mercedes had vanished. Edmond listened to the grim news with outward calm, but leapt ashore lightly, signaling that he wished to be alone. After a couple of hours, he returned. 2 men from Jacopo's boat came aboard to help navigate the yacht, and Edmond ordered the course set straight for Marseilles. Though somewhat prepared for his father's death, he was baffled by Mercedes's mysterious disappearance. Since he couldn't reveal his secret, Edmond found it impossible to give clear instructions to an agent. There were other details he wanted to uncover, and only he could investigate them thoroughly. His reflection in the looking glass during his stay at Leghorn had reassured him he ran no risk of being recognized. Moreover, he now had the means to adopt any disguise he wished. One bright morning, Edmond's yacht, followed by the small fishing boat, boldly entered the port of Marseilles and anchored directly opposite the very spot where, on that unforgettable night of his departure for the Château d'If, he had been placed on the boat destined to take him away. Edmond Dantès felt a chill as a gendarme approached, accompanying officers who were there to demand his health certificate before the yacht could communicate with the shore. But Dantès remained calm, thanks to the self-control he had learned from Faria. He confidently showed an English passport he had obtained in Leghorn. This passport gave him a status that a French one could not, so he was told there was no obstacle to disembarking immediately. As he stepped onto the cannebier, the first person to catch Edmond's eye was a crew member from the Pharaon, one of his former sailors. Edmond greeted the man warmly, eager to see if time had changed his own appearance enough to go unnoticed. He asked the sailor many questions, watching his face closely, but there was no sign that the man recognized him at all. Dantès gave the sailor some money in thanks and moved on. But before he could take many steps, the sailor called out loudly, asking him to stop. Turning back, Edmond listened as the man explained that he had meant to give 2 francs, but had been given a double Napoleon instead. Smiling, Edmond rewarded the sailor's honesty by giving him another double Napoleon so he could celebrate with his mates. The sailor was so surprised he could barely speak, staring after Edmond's retreating figure in disbelief. Some wealthy man from India, he thought to himself. Edmond continued on his way, each step stirring deep emotions in his heart. Every tree and street seemed filled with treasured memories. Finally, he reached the end of the Rue de Noailles, where the Allies de Mailhan came into full view. Here, overwhelmed by emotions and memories of his father, Edmond's knees weakened and his vision blurred. He barely managed to steady himself by leaning against a tree, avoiding falling in the busy street. After gathering his strength, he wiped the sweat from his brow and walked straight to the house where his father had once lived. The familiar flowers his father had lovingly tended before the window were gone. Leaning on a tree, Edmond stared thoughtfully at the upper floors of the worn little house. Then he approached the door and asked if any rooms were available. Though initially told no, he pleaded to see the rooms on the 5th floor. Despite the concierge's repeated claims that the rooms were occupied, Edmond convinced him to ask the tenants for permission. The tenants were a young couple, newly married just a week. Seeing them, Edmond sighed deeply. Nothing remained from his father's time. Walls were papered differently, and all the old furniture was gone. Only the 4 walls stayed as he remembered. The couple's bed was arranged as Edmond's father had once preferred it. Despite his efforts to stay composed, tears filled Edmond's eyes as he realized this was the very place where his father had breathed his last, calling out in vain for his son. The young couple watched quietly, surprised by Edmond's silent tears on his otherwise stern face. Sensing the sacredness of his grief, they gently chose not to ask questions and gave him the privacy to mourn alone. After leaving the rooms filled with painful memories, Edmond was kindly accompanied downstairs by the young couple. They warmly invited him to return any time and assured him that their humble home would always welcome him. As he passed the door on the 4th floor, Edmond paused to ask about Catullus, the tailor who once lived there. He learned that Catullus had fallen on hard times and now ran a small inn on the road between Bellegarde and Beaucaire. With the address of the owner of the house on Ali's de mail hand in hand, Edmond, under the name Lord Wilmore, as shown on his passport, bought the small building. He paid 25,000 francs, significantly more than its actual value, and would have paid even $500,000 without hesitation. That very day, the tenants on the 5th floor received notice from the notary handling the sale. They were offered any room in the house without rent increase, on the condition they immediately vacate their current 2 small rooms. This unexpected event sparked great curiosity and speculation throughout the Ali's de Mailhen neighborhood. None of the rumors came close to the truth. What astonished everyone most was learning that the mysterious stranger who had visited that morning was later seen in the village of the Catalans. There, he entered a poor fisherman's hut and spent over an hour asking about people who had been dead or gone for more than 15 years. The very next day, the family who had answered his questions received a generous gift, a brand new fishing boat complete with 2 seines and a tender. Though eager to thank their benefactor, the family only saw him leave the hut, give a few orders to a sailor, and then quickly mount a horse and ride out of Marseilles through the Port d'Aix. Travelers who have walked through the south of France might have noticed a small roadside inn. It was located roughly halfway between the town of Beaucaire and the village of Bellegarde. This inn stood a bit closer to Beaucaire than to Bellegarde. From its front hung a tin sign that creaked and flapped in the wind. The sign showed a strange, almost comical picture of the Pont du Gard. This modern inn stood on the left side of the main road, with its back facing the Rhone River. Opposite the main entrance, the inn had a small garden, as the locals of Languedoc would call it. This garden was a tiny plot reserved for guests. A few dusty olive trees and stunted fig trees struggled to survive there. Their dry, withered leaves clearly showed how hard the fight for life was. Between these weak shrubs grew a small amount of garlic, tomatoes, and shallots. In one corner of this unattractive garden, a tall pine tree stood alone like a forgotten guard. Its flexible trunk and fan-shaped top were dried and cracked by the fierce heat of the subtropical sun. Every tree, big or small, leaned in the direction of the Mistral wind. The Mistral is one of the 3 curses of Provence, along with the Durance River and the Parliament. The plain around the inn looked more like a dusty lake than solid ground. Scattered here, and there were a few poor stalks of wheat. Farmers in this dry region were experimenting to see if grain could grow in such tough conditions. Each stalk served as a resting place for a grasshopper. These grasshoppers added to the scene by chirping loudly and steadily as people passed through this desert-like land. For about 7 or 8 years, this small tavern had been run by a man and his wife. They had 2 servants to help them, a chambermaid named Trinette and a stableman called Picard. This small staff was enough to handle the inn's needs. A canal built between Beaucaire and Aigues-Mortes had changed transportation. Boats replaced carts and stagecoaches. But this canal also brought trouble for the innkeeper. It ran between the Rhone River, its source, and the post road, which lost much of its traffic. The canal was only a short distance from the inn. It was slowly ruining the inn's business. The innkeeper was a man between 40 and 55 years old. He was tall, strong, and thin, a perfect example of the natives of southern France. His eyes were dark, bright, and deep-set. He had a hooked nose and sharp white teeth, like those of a wild animal. His thick, curly hair and beard, worn under his chin, showed only a few gray strands despite his age. His naturally dark skin had grown even browner from standing all day outside in the burning sun. He spent his days at the threshold of his door, waiting for guests who rarely came. His only protection from the fierce sun was a red handkerchief twisted around his head like a Spanish muleteer's. This man was Gaspard Cadaris, a familiar figure in this story. His wife, Madeleine Radel, was pale, thin, and sickly. She was born near Alls and once shared the beauty the local women are famous for. But that beauty faded under a slow fever common among those living near the ponds of Aiguemortes and the marshes of Camargue. She stayed mostly in her room on the second floor, shivering in her chair or lying weakly in bed. Her husband preferred to keep watch at the door all day. It kept him from hearing her endless complaints about their fate. Whenever she spoke bitterly, he calmly replied with the same words, "Hush, La Carcani. It is God's pleasure that things should be so." The nickname La Carcani came from the village where Madeleine was born, located between Salon and Lambesc. In that part of France, it was common to give people nicknames instead of their real names. Gaspard gave her this name because he probably could not pronounce Madeleine well in his rough speech. Despite this calm acceptance, Gaspard was deeply troubled. He suffered from the double misery of watching the canal steal his customers and profits. At the same time, he endured the daily complaints and sorrowful murmurs of his unhappy wife. Like many who lived in the South, Gaspard Catullus was a man of simple habits and moderate wants. Yet he enjoyed showing off and was fond of flashy displays. During his prosperous days, he and his wife never missed any celebration. They were always among the spectators. Gaspard wore the colorful traditional costume of southern France, a style influenced by both Catalan and Andalusian cultures. Meanwhile, La Carcani dressed in the charming fashion popular among women from Alsace, blending styles from Greece and Arabia. Gradually, however, the watch chains, necklaces, brightly colored scarves, embroidered bodices, velvet vests, fancy stockings, striped gaiters, and silver shoe buckles all vanished. Unable to maintain his former splendor, Gaspard gave up attending festivities, both for himself and his wife. Still, a bitter feeling of envy lingered in his heart whenever the sound of joyful music and laughter from distant revelers reached the sad and he clung to. He stayed more for shelter than profit. On this particular day, Catullus stood in his usual spot by the door. His eyes wandered lazily from a small patch of trimmed grass, where some chickens pecked aimlessly for food, to the empty road stretching north and south. Suddenly, the sharp voice of his wife broke his thoughts. Muttering to himself, he left his post and climbed upstairs to her room. Before going, he carefully left the inn's entrance door wide open, inviting any traveler who might pass by. At that moment, the road was deserted, as empty and lonely as a desert at midday. It stretched endlessly, bordered by tall, thin trees. The scene looked so harsh and unwelcoming that no sane traveler would choose to face such a barren path in the heat. Still, if Catullus had stayed just a few minutes longer, he might have seen a faint shape approaching from Bellegarde. The figure, as it grew closer, revealed a man riding a horse. The rider and horse shared a gentle understanding, moving together with ease. The horse was of Hungarian breed and walked at a calm pace. The rider was a priest, dressed in black and wearing a three-cornered hat. Despite the burning midday sun, they moved steadily along the road. When they reached the Pont du Gard, the horse stopped. It was unclear whether this was the horse's choice or the rider's. The priest dismounted and led his horse by the reins, searching for a place to tie it. Using a handle on a half-collapsed door, he secured the animal. Then, pulling a red cotton handkerchief from his pocket, he wiped the sweat from his forehead. Finally, he stepped forward and knocked 3 times on the door with the tip of his iron-tipped cane. At this strange sound, a huge black dog rushed out to confront the bold visitor. The dog growled fiercely, showing sharp white teeth, clearly unaccustomed to visitors. Just then, heavy footsteps came down the wooden stairs from the upper floor. With many bows and polite smiles, the innkeeper at the Pont du Gard warmly invited his guest inside. Catullus warmly welcomed the visitor, speaking to his dog to calm it down and assure the guest that the animal was more bark than bite. He offered the traveler some wine to ease the heat of the day. Only then did he notice the visitor's attire and apologize for not recognizing him sooner. He humbly asked what refreshment the abbé might desire, promising all he had was at the visitor's service. The priest returned Catullus' gaze with a long, searching look, as if inviting the same scrutiny. Noticing the innkeeper's surprise at his careful attention, the priest broke the silence, speaking with a strong Italian accent and confirming his assumption that the man before him was indeed Monsieur Catullus. The innkeeper acknowledged his identity, surprised by the directness of the question. The priest recalled Catullus' past life, mentioning his residence on the 4th floor of the Allées de Mailhan and his previous work as a tailor. Catullus explained that his trade had suffered due to the intense heat in Marseille. Changing the subject, he asked if the abbé would like some refreshment. The abbé requested a bottle of the best wine, and with permission, wished to continue their conversation. Catullus, eager not to miss the chance of selling one of his few remaining bottles of Cor, quickly opened a trapdoor in the floor serving as storage. After a short wait, he returned to find the priest seated comfortably with the once aggressive dog now calm and resting between his knees, eyes fixed on the visitor's face. The priest inquired if Catullus was truly alone. The innkeeper replied that his wife, the only other person in the house, was sick and bedridden, unable to help. Noticing the sparse furnishings, the priest showed interest and asked if Catullus was married. The innkeeper sighed, admitting his poverty and lamenting how honesty does not necessarily bring success. The abbé studied him carefully as the conversation deepened. Catullus firmly claimed his honesty, emphasizing how rare such integrity had become. The priest responded that good will eventually be rewarded and the wicked punished, though Catullus bitterly countered that belief was a matter of personal choice. The priest suggested he might prove the innkeeper wrong. Curious, Catullus asked what he meant. The priest explained he first needed to confirm that Catullus was the man he sought. He asked if Catullus knew a young sailor named Edmond Dantès during 1814 or 1815. Emotion darkened Catullus' face as he affirmed their friendship, while the priest's intense gaze revealed a deeper purpose. The priest reminded Catullus of the sailor's name, and the innkeeper excitedly confirmed it was indeed Edmond. He eagerly questioned the fate of his friend, whether Edmond was alive, free, prosperous, and happy. The priest revealed the tragic truth. Edmond had died a hopeless, heartbroken prisoner, worse off than the criminals punished at Toulon's galleys. Pallor replaced the flush on Catullus' face as he turned away, wiping tears with the corner of his red handkerchief. He murmured sorrowfully, seeing this as proof that good people never prosper, while only the wicked succeed. Speaking passionately, he wondered why, if God truly hated the wicked, he did not destroy them completely. The abbé noted Catullus' tone suggested deep love for Edmond. Catullus admitted that though he once envied Edmond's fortune, he now sincerely mourned his fate. After a brief silence, the priest continued, confirming he had visited Edmond on his deathbed to offer religious comfort. When asked what Edmond died of, the abbé explained that young men in prison rarely survive, dying from the harshness of their captivity itself. Catullus wiped the sweat from his brow as the abbé revealed that even in his final moments, Edmond swore by his crucified Redeemer that he did not know why he had been imprisoned. The innkeeper quietly agreed, convinced Edmond told the truth. Edmond had asked the abbé to uncover the mystery behind his imprisonment and restore his good name if it had been unfairly stained. The abbé's gaze grew steady and intense, clearly pleased as he observed the deepening gloom spreading across Catullus' face. He began to tell of a wealthy Englishman, a fellow prisoner with Edmond Dantès who had been released during the Second Restoration. This Englishman possessed a diamond of immense value, which he gave to Dantès as a token of gratitude for caring for him during his severe illness in prison. Rather than trying to bribe his jailers with the jewel, Dantès carefully kept it, hoping it would secure his future freedom and livelihood. Catullus' eyes brightened eagerly, asking if the diamond was truly that valuable. The abbé explained that to a prisoner like Edmond, the diamond was indeed priceless, estimated at 50,000 francs. Catullus was amazed, imagining the stone must be huge. The abbé then produced a small box, revealing the diamond set in a finely crafted ring. The jewel sparkled brilliantly, leaving Catullus almost breathless with admiration. Curious how the abbé came to possess the diamond, Catullus inquired if Edmond had made him his heir. The priest replied he was only the executor of Edmond's will. Edmond had spoken of 4 dear friends and a betrothed maiden, one friend being Catullus himself. The abbé went on naming the others: Danglars, Fernand, who, despite rivalry, was sincerely attached, and Mercedes, Edmond's fiancée. A wicked smile crossed Catullus' face at the mention of these names. The abbé calmly asked to finish before any remarks. He continued explaining Edmond's will instructed the diamond's value to be divided equally among these 5, the 5th being Edmond's deceased father. Catullus confirmed the old man had died about a year after Edmond vanished. When asked about the cause, Catullus hesitated, then said the doctors called it gastroenteritis, but he believed the old man died of starvation. The abbé was shocked, rising in disbelief. He compared starvation to a death unthinkable even for stray animals, and how it was intolerable that a Christian man should perish this way among others who claimed the same faith. Suddenly, a weak voice interrupted. La Carconte, Catullus' sickly wife, had quietly descended the stairs and listened to the conversation. She warned her husband to mind his own business, cautioning that the stranger's motives might not be pure. Catullus defended himself, insisting politeness demanded he answer the abbé's questions. The abbé reassured La Carconte that his intentions were honest, and her husband would be safe as long as he spoke truthfully. La Carconte remained skeptical, murmuring that promises of safety were often broken, leading to misery and persecution for the unsuspecting. She soon relapsed in a trembling sickness, allowing the men to continue their talk, but stayed close enough to hear every word. The abbé calmed himself with a drink of water before continuing. He reflected on the sad fate of Edmond's father, who must have been forsaken to die so terribly. Catullus added that though Mercedes and Monsieur Morel showed kindness to the old man, he had developed a deep hatred for Fernand, one of Edmond's trusted friends. The abbé asked if Fernand truly was faithful, just as the woman warned Catullus to be careful with his words. Catullus did not respond to the interruption, though it was clear he was irritated and annoyed. Addressing the abbé, he questioned whether a man could remain faithful to another if he coveted that man's wife. He reflected that Dantès was so honorable and genuine that he believed everyone's professions of friendship. Poor Edmond had been cruelly deceived, but it was fortunate he never learned the truth, or forgiving his enemies on his deathbed might have been even harder. In his native tongue, which carried a rough, poetic tone, Catullus admitted he feared the curse of the dead more than the hatred of the living. La Carconte angrily called him an imbecile. The abbé then asked Catullus if he knew how Fernand had wronged Dantès, to which Catullus claimed no one knew better. When urged to speak, La Carconte warned him to hold his tongue, but Catullus admitted he might be right. He questioned the use of revealing the truth, reasoning that since Edmond was dead, hatred and revenge should be buried with him. The abbé asked if Catullus preferred that false and treacherous men receive the rewards meant for faithful friends. Catullus agreed, saying that Edmond's gift was not meant for traitors like Fernand and Danglars, and that the money would mean little to them anyway. La Carconte cautioned that those two could destroy him easily. The abbé asked if they were so rich and powerful, but Catullus admitted he did not know their history and was reluctant to explain. The abbé, showing indifference, said Catullus was free to speak or remain silent, respecting his choice but intending to fulfill his promise to Edmond by disposing of the diamond. The abbé once again revealed the jewel, holding it so its brilliance dazzled Catullus. Calling for his wife, Catullus announced the diamond's value and its intended division among Edmond's father, Mercedes, Fernand, Danglars, and himself. La Carconte expressed awe, and Catullus emphasized the sacrilege of rewarding traitors. The abbé calmly reminded him that the fault was Catullus for allowing this conversation and requested addresses for Fernand and Danglars to carry out Edmond's wishes. Catullus became visibly agitated, and as the abbé moved toward the door to check on his horse, he and his wife exchanged meaningful looks. Catullus believed the diamond could be theirs if they chose to act. La Carconte expressed skepticism, but ultimately distanced herself from the affair, retreating upstairs with chills despite the heat, warning her husband to consider his actions carefully. Catullus assured her he had reflected and decided. Returning downstairs, the abbé asked what Catullus intended to do, and he replied he would tell all he knew. The abbé praised this decision, emphasizing his duty to honor Edmond's wishes rather than seeking hidden information. Catullus, flushed with greed, welcomed the abbé's attention but suggested they close and bar the door for privacy, which he did cautiously. The abbé positioned himself in a shadowed corner to listen intently, while Catullus sat opposite him on a small stool. From above, La Carconte's trembling voice warned it was not her affair, but Catullus silenced her, saying he would bear all consequences, and then began his story. Catullus began by asking for a promise that if the abbé ever used the information he was about to share, he would never reveal that Catullus was the source. He warned that the people involved were wealthy and powerful, and even a slight touch from them could shatter him like glass. The abbé reassured him, explaining that as a priest, he held confessions in strict confidence. He emphasized that his sole aim was to fulfill the last wishes of a dying friend, and urged Catullus to speak openly and truthfully, without hatred or fear. Being an Italian and soon returning to his convent, the abbé had no personal connections to the people Catullus mentioned, which seemed to give the innkeeper some courage. Catullus then prepared to reveal the harsh truth behind the friendships Edmond Dantès once trusted. He began with Edmond's father, a man deeply loved by his son. The abbé already knew the story up until Edmond's arrest at a small cabaret near Marseilles, called La Réserve, which was also the location of Edmond's betrothal feast. The joyous celebration ended in sorrow when a police commissary and soldiers came to arrest Edmond. The abbé explained that Edmond himself only knew of his own circumstances and never saw or heard from the 5 individuals who had betrayed him again. Catullus described the old man's sorrow after Edmond's arrest. The father returned home alone, folding his wedding suit and pacing his room all night without rest. His grief was so profound that even Catullus, who lived beneath him, felt the pain in every step the old man took. Mercedes visited, seeking protection from M. de Villefort, but was unsuccessful. She tried to care for the old man, who refused to leave, believing Edmond would come back to find him. Despite repeated efforts, the old man grew more solitary and refused visitors, except for Mercedes on rare occasions. The innkeeper described how the father's belongings gradually disappeared as he sold them to survive, and how, after falling seriously ill, he was put on a strict diet by a doctor but refused to eat. Eventually, after 9 days of despair and fasting, the old man died, cursing those responsible for his misery and blessing Edmond with his final words. The abbé was visibly moved, recognizing the horror of a man dying from starvation caused by other men, not fate. He demanded to know who these men were, and Catullus named Fernand and Danglars, driven by jealousy, one from love and the other from ambition. They had denounced Edmond as a Bonapartist agent, both participating in the act, one writing the letter and the other posting it. The letter was written at La Reserve the day before the betrothal feast. The abbé acknowledged the significance of this fact, recalling the wisdom of Faria's judgments. Surprised, the abbé questioned whether Catullus had witnessed these events firsthand, and after some hesitation, the innkeeper admitted that he had been present but was too intoxicated to fully comprehend what was happening. He had tried to speak up, but was reassured it was just a harmless joke. The following day, though aware of the consequences, he remained silent because Danglars warned him that speaking out could implicate those who supported Edmond as accomplices. Catullus confessed his silence was cowardly, though not criminal, explaining he let things take their course out of fear given the political climate at the time. Catullus confessed that remorse haunted him day and night for his silence and betrayal. He frequently sought God's forgiveness, believing that this one serious failing was the cause of his miserable state. He admitted that he was paying the price for a moment of selfishness and often told La Carcani, when she complained, to accept it as God's will. The abbé acknowledged Catullus' honesty and said that confessing his fault was a step toward forgiveness. However, Catullus lamented that Edmond had died without pardoning him. The abbé reassured him that Edmond did not know the full truth during his life, though Catullus believed the dead were aware of everything. The abbé then asked about a certain Morel, and Catullus explained that he was the owner of the ship Pharaon and a true patron to Edmond. Morel had repeatedly intervened on Edmond's behalf, even risking persecution during the political turmoil of the emperor's return. Morel cared deeply for Edmond's father, visiting him often and offering to take him into his home. Before the father's death, Morel had paid his debts and ensured he was buried with dignity, leaving behind a red silk purse as proof of his generosity. Despite this, Morel's fortunes had declined drastically. The abbé was surprised and asked if Morel was still alive and well, but Catullus bitterly replied that Morel was near ruin. After 25 years of honest work and a respected name in Marseilles, Morel had lost 5 ships and suffered major financial blows due to bankruptcies. His only hope rested on the Pharaon, expected from the Indies with a valuable cargo. Morel had a wife who remained loyal and a daughter whose engagement was broken due to his ruined status, and a son serving as a lieutenant. The abbé was horrified to learn that Morel's troubles had only increased with family responsibilities, and Catullus explained that if Morel were alone, he might have ended his own life. The conversation then turned to Danglars, the mastermind behind Edmond's downfall. Catullus detailed how Danglars left Marseilles and, through the recommendation of Morel, unaware of his crime, secured a position as cashier in a Spanish bank. Danglars prospered during the war with Spain, making a fortune and later speculating in the stock market to multiply his wealth. He married well, first the daughter of a banker, then a widow connected to the king's court, becoming the wealthy and titled Baron Danglars. The abbé noted this wealth with a tone that hinted at doubt about true happiness, to which Catullus agreed that fortune does not guarantee contentment. Fernand's story was similar but more mysterious. Despite his humble origins as a Catalan fisher boy without education or means, Fernand gained both fortune and high position. Catullus recounted how Fernand was drafted into the army, fought at Ligny, and deserted his post by following a general who was secretly collaborating with the enemy. This betrayal was rewarded by the Bourbons, who granted him military rank and favor. Fernand's actions during the Spanish War, including secret dealings with royalists and leading troops through difficult terrain, earned him a colonelcy, a noble title, and the Legion of Honor. The abbé remarked on the role of destiny in these events, and Catullus continued, explaining that with peace across Europe, Fernand turned his attention to Greece's War of Independence. While France did not openly support the Greeks, it allowed volunteer aid. Fernand sought and obtained leave to serve in Greece, maintaining his army status while pursuing new opportunities. After some time, it was revealed that the Count de Morcerf, the name Fernand now bore, had joined Ali Pasha's service as instructor general. Though Ali Pasha was eventually killed, before his death, he rewarded Fernand generously. With this inheritance, Fernand returned to France and was promoted to lieutenant general. Now, Fernand owned a grand residence at number 27, Rue du Helder in Paris. The abbé hesitated, but then asked about Mercedes, who, according to rumors, had disappeared. Catullus compared her disappearance to the sun, setting only to rise again even more brilliantly. He added that Mercedes had become one of the most prominent ladies in Paris. The abbé expressed surprise, but admitted he had witnessed so many extraordinary things that this story seemed plausible. Catullus recounted Mercedes' deep despair after losing Edmond and her failed attempts to secure protection from de Villefort. After Fernand's departure, a man she considered like a brother, she was left utterly alone, caring for the dying elder Dantès. One day, Fernand unexpectedly returned in uniform, which brought her a bittersweet comfort. She mistook her relief for love, but her heart still belonged to Edmond, who was presumed dead. Fernand eventually professed love, but Mercedes requested 6 more months to mourn Edmond. After 18 months, Mercedes married Fernand in the very church where she had once been engaged to Edmond, marking only a change in bridegrooms. Despite outward appearances of calm, Mercedes was deeply shaken, especially when passing La Reserve, the site of her former betrothal. Fernand, anxious about Edmond's possible return, rushed to remove Mercedes and himself from Marseille shortly after their wedding. Years later, during the Spanish War, Catullus saw Mercedes in Perpignan, where she was educating her son Albert. The abbé expressed surprise at Mercedes' ability to educate her child, given her humble background. Catullus explained that Mercedes had cultivated herself, learning music, drawing, and other arts, not only to distract from her grief, but to match her rising social status as Fernand's fortune grew. Though now rich and titled, Catullus believed Mercedes was not truly happy. When Catullus found himself destitute, he sought help from old acquaintances. Danglars refused to see him, and Fernand sent a small sum through his valet, while Mercedes discreetly left him a purse of money but avoided meeting him. Catullus had no dealings with M. de Villefort, who had married and left Marseille shortly after Edmond's arrest. Unlike the others, Catullus remained poor and forgotten. The abbé offered hope, reminding him that God's justice may seem delayed, but is inevitable. He handed Catullus a diamond worth 50,000 francs, meant to be shared among Edmond's friends. Since Edmond had but one true friend, the diamond could not be divided, and the abbé urged Catullus to sell it and use the money to free himself from his misery. Catullus nervously reached out one hand while wiping sweat from his brow with the other, pleading not to make light of a man's happiness or despair. The abbé responded that he understood such feelings well and would never jest about them. He urged Catullus to accept the diamond, but in return, he asked for the red silk purse that M. Morel had left on old Dantès' chimney piece, which Catullus claimed to still possess. Surprised, Catullus fetched the faded red silk purse from a large cupboard and handed it over, receiving the diamond in exchange. Overwhelmed by the abbé's honesty, Catullus remarked that no one knew about the diamond and the abbé could have kept it, but he chose not to. The abbé confirmed the truth of all he had been told and asked Catullus to swear on a crucifix and his wife's testament that he spoke honestly. Catullus solemnly swore to recount everything exactly as it happened, invoking his faith and soul's salvation. Satisfied, the The abbé wished that the money would benefit Catullus and said his farewells, troubled by the bitterness he had witnessed among men. He then mounted his horse and left, leaving behind a grateful Catullus. After the abbé's departure, Catullus saw La Carcani, who was pale and trembling, questioning whether all that had been heard was truly so. He assured her that it was, showing her the diamond as proof. The woman cast doubt, suggesting the diamond could be faked to trick Catullus into revealing his secret without paying. Taken aback by the idea, Catullus quickly decided they would soon find out, planning to show the jewel to jewelers at the Beaucaire Fair, where many Parisian experts gathered. He asked his wife to watch the house and promised to return in 2 hours before hastily leaving in the opposite direction of the abbé. Alone, La Carcani reflected on the value of 50,000 francs, acknowledging it as a large sum but not a fortune. And that brings us to the end of Volume 1 of the Count of Monte Cristo. Edmond Dantès' story is far from over. His journey of hope, betrayal, and relentless revenge has only just begun. As we move forward, prepare to uncover deeper secrets and witness his transformation into a man driven by destiny. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Who do you find most intriguing so far? The next episode will be coming very soon, so stay tuned. Thank you so much for joining me on this adventure. Until then, stay safe and keep your curiosity alive.